Did you know that the chocolate you eat today may have passed through the hands of a hungry child? Not in a factory or a supermarket, but on a cocoa farm in Ivory Coast or Ghana. Children wake before sunrise to work long hours harvesting cocoa beans that feed a multi-billion-dollar industry. An industry built on sweetness for the world, but struggles for the producers behind every chocolate bar. There's a story the industry would rather keep hidden.
Ghana and the Ivory Coast are engaged in one of the most important fights in the history of African commerce. It is over cocoa, and the mainstream media isn't talking about it.
Chocolate is ancient. Our forefathers discovered chocolate before the Europeans. The Maya and Aztec civilization in Central America were enjoying this chocolate drink. They loved it so much, and for them, cocoa was valuable and sacred. Then came the 1500s, when the European colonizers arrived America. Spanish explorers took back cocoa to Europe, and suddenly, chocolate became a luxury drink, a drink for only kings, the elites, and the rich. By the 1800s, things changed. Demand for cocoa became very high. Factories in Europe were looking for more lands to groom their cocoa farms. So, how did cocoa get to Ghana, or how did cocoa get to Ivory Coast? Who was the first man to plant cocoa in Ghana? This is Solid Finance Podcast, where we bring you economic and finance updates. Do well to like, do well to share, and don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Solid Finance Podcast, for more finance content like this. Cocoa was flourishing in Europe in the 15th century. Basel missionaries were experimenting, and as such, they took lands in Africa, Ghana to be precise, to start their experiment. All their trials to plant didn't yield any fruit, and that's because they weren't planting on a fertile land. In 1870, a man called Tete Kwashi tried to plant cocoa in Ghana, but then it was to no avail. How did Tete Kwashi get cocoa? He was working for the missionaries, and so when he was being sent to Fernando Po on a missionary journey, he stuffed cocoa in his toolbox, and as such, he was able to pass all the checkpoints safely without being caught. When he arrived Ghana, he planted them, but then it wasn't yielding fruit, it wasn't growing. In 1879, when he planted it in another part of Ghana, it yielded fruit. It grew, and then that was how cocoa was being brought to Ghana.
Who brought cocoa to Ghana? And who was the first person to plant cocoa in Ghana? Now, these are two different questions that they fail to explain to us better in school. Now, cocoa was something that was flourishing way back in Europe in the 16th century. The Europeans started experimenting with it in Africa in the 1800s. Now, in Ghana, the Basel missionaries, they were also doing same with a lot of cash crops. This was somewhere in the 1850s. They tried for a long time, but then these crops couldn't grow. They were attacked by pests. Now, this is where Tete Kwashi came in. He was an apprentice at the Basel Missionary Workshop in Ekropong, where he was learning blacksmith. Now, in the 1870s, they sent Tete Kwashi to Fernando Po on a missionary journey. Now, while returning back to Ghana, he took some of the cocoa pods.
In 1890, French colonial powers rapidly expanded cocoa farming in Ivory Coast. At first, when the cocoa farming came to Ivory Coast, it brought money to the farmers, it made their life stable, and it made them comfortable. But with time, things began to go south. The industry had transformed into something exploitative. The 1950s marked a significant boom period for the cocoa, particularly in West Africa and certain parts of Latin America. Chocolate had global companies like Cadbury, Hershey, and Nestlé. They turned chocolate into a household product by mid-20th century. Millions around the world consumed cocoa, and as such, this made West Africa very important. West Africa slowly became the center of production. Today, Ghana and Ivory Coast produce 60% of the world's cocoa. But here's a contradiction. How can the producers be so vulnerable economically? Why are the producers still poor? Farmers grow the cocoa, but global companies control the profits. As competitions increased, this made them drop the salaries of farmers because everybody was now turning to the cocoa business, and this has trapped them in poverty. In 1998, ports began exposing child labor in most of the cocoa farms in West Africa. Children were seen working long hours with dangerous tools like cutlasses, without supervision. Slowly, they stopped going to schools. They started going just to the cocoa farm. It was then that the world began to see the documentary of what the children were passing through in Ghana and in Ivory Coast. In 2010, researchers recorded that over 1.8 million children were still involved in cocoa labor in West Africa.
I'm here on a cocoa farm in Ghana that sources directly to Cargill. Now, if you go to their website, you're going to see they made something they call the Cargill Cocoa Promise, which is there's no child labor in their cocoa and that they're helping to rehabilitate children. This is the reality. Every farm that we have visited had young children like this one here, who's only 10 years old, using a machete to open up cocoa pods and performing other hazardous work instead of being in school. That's the Cargill Cocoa Promise.
The deeper you investigate, the more complicated the story gets. Most cocoa farmers are not trying to exploit you, they're only trying to survive. Global cocoa price fluctuates, and as such, when it goes down, people suffer. It was recorded that President Kwame Nkrumah, after seeing how much cocoa Ghana was making, he decided that they should build silos where they can keep excess cocoa to avoid it from spoiling and to avoid them from suffering when crisis happened. But then this project was abandoned when President Kwame Nkrumah was no more.
So this is what remains of the giant silos constructed in Tema by Ghana's first president Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah in the early 1960s. They were designed to store and preserve excess cocoa and other grains, a revolutionary vision to transform Ghana's economy and control cocoa prices. At the time, Ghana was the world's leading producer of cocoa, supplying over 40% of global output. These silos, with a storage of 200,000 tons, were built at a cost of 8.5 million British pounds. The idea was simple but strategic. When world market prices fell, Ghana would not be forced to sell cheaply. Ghana would store, wait, and protect the farmer. However, the project was severely criticized by political opposition.
Most families have been faced with impossible choices. Because of poverty, children have to strive to survive. Every October, the harvest of cocoa starts, and at this point, everybody becomes very busy.
Cocoa growers here export most of their cocoa beans to Europe and North America, where they're turned into chocolate. Joseph grows 11 acres of cocoa. Every October, he and his family begin harvesting the yellow pods. It takes just 4 days. Joseph collects the pods and takes them to the breaking ground. Here, workers crack them open and remove the beans by hand. After farmers dry the beans, they're bagged up. About 70% of these beans will be sent overseas. Ghana processes only 30% of its cocoa beans domestically. In total, he packs
From 1960 till date, most farmlands in Ghana and Ivory Coast are being cleared for cocoa farming. National parks shrinked, forestation accelerated, and slowly, the wildlife disappeared. Today, Ivory Coast and Ghana have lost so much of its original forest. That's because of the high demand for cocoa. Some scientists have warned that the major sites for cocoa farming might become less productive in a couple of years to come, which means more land pressure, more poverty, and more exploitation. This is very alarming.
To a story on climate change, because Ghana's farmers are rewriting a story that once linked cocoa to the loss of forests. Thanks to the Red Plus initiative, farmers are planting more trees, earning more money, and protecting the land that sustains them. Mahmoud Mohammed Nuruddin has more in today's Climate Focus series.
Cocoa farmer Mary Pampo walks through her farm with a smile she didn't have a few years ago.
The world loves chocolate, but children in Ivory Coast and Ghana are carrying machetes before sunrise just to make sure that cocoa gets to your country for chocolate to be produced. The biggest question still remains: why are the producers still poor? Watch up until this point. It means that you've enjoyed the video. Do well to like, do well to share, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Solid Finance Podcast, for more finance contents like this. Until next time, bye for now.